time for the Property Podcast, where every week tens of thousands of property investors, new and experienced, join together to get news, knowledge and laughs at our expense. With me, Rob Bence.
And me, Rob Dix. Join us every Thursday morning for your weekly dose of property ideas and motivation. Then head over to our website at thepropertypodcast.com to keep the conversation going. Now though, let's get started.
Hello everybody and welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B. With me is Rob D. It is property, it's not the World Cup, so you get a little bit of break from football, especially if you don't like it. Thanks for joining us. Rob, we've got a interesting episode coming up this week. It's number 66 and we're covering a subject that we have to put our hands up and say neither of us are experts on.
We do. I've just realised 66, World Cup and all that. See, I managed to get the World Cup back in there somehow. But I will now shut up. Yeah, we're talking about lease options this week, which we have to hold up our hands and say we don't know a huge amount about, but it's something that gets talked about a lot. And so we're going to give you an introduction in this week's episode, along with our resource, our news story, and a couple of exciting little updates from us as well.
Okay, so first of all, we always like to give thanks to the people who were kind enough to leave us a review. If you're enjoying the show and you haven't left a review yet, feel free, go to iTunes, we'd really appreciate it, and we will read it out. This week, thank you very much to the following. And the first review is by Ian House, and Ian says, property investments are significant undertakings for most people, and the research required to gain confidence into their first investment is daunting. Rob and Rob's podcast series provides a rich repository of information that will furnish its listeners with real-life, honest and accurate information on all aspects of residential property investment. They also complement this knowledge with advice on running property investments as successful business concerns. A very entertaining podcast that greatly assisted my learning and helped me take my first step in property investment. And add-on benefit for me was the complimentary walking tour I took of London when trying to find Rob's new offices. Invigorating. And there's a smile there. Yes, RMP moved offices in the last few months, so we have had a few people going to the wrong address. Of course, that's our fault, not our clients. Thank you, Ian. Thank you for still leaving a review after that. Next up, Alex says, great stuff. I don't really leave reviews, but I've enjoyed listening to some of these podcasts so much I felt compelled to break this bad habit. Rob and Rob get the balance just right, I think. It's topical, pleasant, and an easy listen, with the right level of detail for the length of the podcast. It also encourages you to take a step back and really think about the fundamentals, the why, the where, etc. Oh, and for an app geek like myself, the resource of the week recommendation is often the cherry on the cake. Keep it up. And a short one for the final one this week, well worth a listen. Warren Dillon says, an easy way to pick up the news in one fun, easy listen. Thanks for doing all the hard work for us, Rob. Don't know if that's for Property News Radio. That's gone on there. Oh, go on. I need that for Property News Radio. Put it on there too, please, Warren. Thank you to everybody who leaves us reviews for any of our podcasts. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, we absolutely do. Thank you especially to Alex for breaking the habit and leaving a first review. Even if you've never left a review of a podcast before, please do. It's really easy. If you go over to the show notes, we'll show you exactly how to do it. The show notes for this week are at thepropertyhub.net/lease options. So, Rob, a couple of updates before we get into the episode. We've got a couple of interesting things going on over at the Property Hub. The first one is a little survey that we've been putting together. Basically, we have a lot of conversations with investors all the time, every day, Rob especially. And we pick up lots of interesting things, lots of patterns, but then we thought it would be nice to actually put some numbers against this and actually get some proper data. So we've put together a survey that will help us really get to the bottom of what property investors in the UK are like. It'll only take a couple of minutes to fill in. It's all multiple choice. And with the answers, we'll be able to do some really interesting stuff and get some great data. So if you'd like to take part in that, it's at thepropertyhub.net/survey. The link will be in the show notes again, but it's thepropertyhub.net/survey. Head over there. We'll leave it up for about another week or so. We'd really love to get your response. Only takes a couple of minutes, and I'm really excited about seeing the results that we get out of this and seeing what insights we get and seeing if the data backs up the hunches that we've got from all these conversations that we've been having.
Yeah, it literally does take a couple of minutes to do. And the nice thing is we don't require any of your personal information. So this is not a survey where we can find out everything about your personal details and then spam you for years to come. It's just questions about property investment. So go to thepropertyhub.net/survey and fill in those questions and we'll reveal the data very, very soon. And also, Rob, we've got a new feature on the Property Hub. This was suggested by Nick Stott of Homeshore, so thank you, Nick. We appreciate this. It's a jobs board. So lots of people are always asking both of us, how can I get into property investment as a career? What can I do? How can I learn more? And obviously working in the industry is a way of doing that. So we've created this jobs board. Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so it's just part of the forum at the Property Hub. If you go over to thepropertyhub.net/forum, you'll see a link to the jobs board. And all we do is we post a topic where we've been given the job description and how to get in contact, and you just get in touch with the company directly. So we don't vet these positions, we're not endorsing them, but you can just kind of use it as a place to find out about the role and then go off and do your own research and do the whole application process from there. And if you're interested in advertising a job that you've got available, then you can do that as well. It's all completely free. We're not making any money off this. But it just seemed like it was something that we needed to do because we know a few people who've got jobs already through the connections that they've made in the hub. So it seemed like a good idea to make it a more formal thing. So that's just gone up this week. One of the first adverts on there was from Nick and Mark at Homeshore, who suggested the whole idea. And they are looking for personal estate agents. And the whole idea with that is that if you want to be an estate agent but be self-employed and not be tied to an office, you can work with them. You can work independently in your area. They'll give you the backup of the advertising and the office support and everything from their office up in Liverpool. And you just split the commission between you. So it's a really interesting idea. It's a model that they use in the US a lot, but it's something that I've never seen in the UK before. And it's something that I talked to Nick about on the Property Geek podcast a couple of months back. Seemed like a really interesting idea. It's great to see that it's finally coming to fruition. So if that sounds like it's something that you might be interested in, get over to the jobs board and you'll be able to find out more about it.
Yeah, we said we're not going to endorse any jobs, but we can endorse Nick and Mark. They're two great guys. And if you want to learn about property, working with those two is a really good way of going about it. Okay, so news story this week, an interesting piece of data from Rightmove. Asking prices in London have fallen slightly month on month. Okay, so they've fallen by about 0.5%. Now, before we start calling the end of the London market, which we're not about to do, we can say that this is an interesting data change. Now, is it a blip? Okay, is this now part of a new trend or is it a one-off? We'll have to wait and see. There could be other factors that have attributed to this. But the reason why we've covered it is because London has been powering on for so long that any blip in the data is newsworthy. The asking prices in London, Rob, have grown 14% this year.
Yeah, which is just, and I kind of knew that, but when I saw this story and I saw that 14% figure in writing, it's like, wow, that's a lot. And yeah, now it looks like maybe it has hit the top, maybe it is just a blip. We don't know, but there has been all this talk as well about measures to cool the market. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I have seen in news stories recently there has been more of an emphasis put on the London market rather than the property market in general. So the message seems to be getting out that the London market is completely different from anywhere else in the UK. And you can't just take broad measures that are going to affect everything because it could have unintended consequences elsewhere. As you said, it's just 1 month of data. We'll have to watch it over the summer. The summer's always a bit quieter anyway. We'll have to keep an eye on it and see how this one develops.
Indeed, but a slowdown in the London market would be no bad thing at all. Okay, so topic of the week. As we said at the top of the show, neither of us are experts on this topic, and neither of us have implemented this strategy either. Please don't take this as advice that you should go ahead and do it, okay? And the subject is lease options.
Yeah, so lease options are something that get talked about a lot on property forums and so on. You get them mentioned in books as well. I get the impression that most people talk about them more than doing them for the most part because they're not easy to do. And we're going to come into that later on. But you can see why they're a very attractive idea. Like Rob said, it's not something that we've done, but it's something where we understand the theory. And it's probably one of the strategies in property that's the most difficult to understand. So what we're going to try and do in this episode is explain what it is. And once you've got to grips with that, why it's something that you might want to do and why it's actually quite a difficult thing to do as well. So this really is just going to be an introduction and hopefully it's something that you're going to be able to understand fully. And if it is something you want to do, be fully informed if you want to go away and look at it a little bit more. But we need to start with actually explaining what one is.
Okay, so what is a lease option? Well, there's two parts, the lease and the option. So the option is agreeing the price now at which you can buy a house or apartment at some point in the future. As the name implies, it's only an option. So you have the option to buy it. So if later you decide that you don't want to buy at that price, you don't have to. Okay, so that's the option part. The lease part refers to renting the property from the owner until you decide whether or not to exercise that option. The investor needs to pay a fee to buy the option, called an option consideration, and this can be anything the investor and the vendor agree on, as much as several £1,000s or as little as £1. So you've heard people talking about buying a house or property for £1. This is what they mean. They're paying £1 to set up that option.
Okay, so let's try and explain how a deal normally works and why people want to do it in the first place. And we'll include some numbers here as well to try and make it a little bit more real. Normally, an investor will offer to buy the property at today's full market value or above today's full market value at some point in the future. And in the meantime, while they have that option, but before they decide whether to exercise it or not, they will rent the property from the vendor at a figure that allows the vendor to cover their mortgage and their other expenses. So in a lease option deal, a vendor will normally be in a position where they need to move on quickly and they can't sell their property quickly enough through the normal channels. Also, they might be in negative equity and they might also be behind on their mortgage payments and in danger of repossession. So there's normally either in some financial difficulty or they're under severe time pressure or a combination of the two. They're the most common reasons why a vendor might want to get into a lease option deal. To take an example, let's say that a property is worth £90,000 today, but the vendor owes £100,000 to their mortgage company on it. So there's no way that they can sell it on the open market and clear the mortgage. Anyone who's buying that property will only want to pay £90,000, and that would leave the vendor still owing the mortgage company £10,000, which they wouldn't be able to pay them. So as an investor, it wouldn't make any sense for you to buy it for £100,000 today, because that's more than it's worth. But you could take an option to buy it for £100,000 at any point in the next 10 years. And to take that option, you could pay the option consideration, which can be any amount of money, as Rob said. But in this situation, say that you'd pay £1,000 to cover the moving costs of the vendor so they can move out and find somewhere else to rent. And while you're deciding whether to exercise the option, you can rent it for the vendor for, say, £400 a month, which might be well below the market rate, but it's what the vendor needs to pay off their mortgage. So in this scenario, you've, in theory, got a bit of a win-win. You've got a vendor who's happy because he knows that he'll get the full value that his property is worth at some point in the future, and that will give him enough to pay off his mortgage. In the meantime, he's getting £400 in rent, which is enough to make the mortgage payments, so he doesn't have to worry about that. If he's in danger of repossession or fallen behind, then that's great because there's no risk of that anymore. And in fact, often the investor will actually take over the mortgage payments and pay them directly to the lender to make sure that they get paid, although the mortgage remains in the vendor's name. So I said it was a win-win, and the investor is happy as well, because basically the investor in this situation has locked in today's prices for a purchase that can be made in for up to 10 years. And as we've talked about on the podcast before, property tends to double every 10 years. So by the time you want to exercise that option, the house could be worth $200,000 pretty much. In the meantime, let's say that you can rent it out at a fairly average yield. You can rent it out for £700 a month. So if you're renting it out for £700, paying the vendor £400, then that is a profit of £300 a month without having any money tied up. So you haven't actually bought the property yet. You've still got all your money available to buy other properties as normal, but you're still making a £300 rental profit. That is the basics of how it works for the vendor and the investor. With us so far?
Right, okay. So that shows up, a really good play out for both parties. But now let's bring into the equation the tenant buyer. So the investor could just wait until the time's right to buy that property at a great price. But often they want to make money without having to tie up any of their own money at all. So they look for a tenant buyer, somebody who wants to buy their own home but doesn't have a deposit saved up yet. The tenant buyer rents the house from the investor at the full market rate, £700 in our example, and agrees on a price they'll buy it for in the future. They also pay a top-up that gets saved up and put towards that deposit. And when they have enough of a deposit to get a mortgage, they can buy the property from the investor at the price that was agreed. Of course, the investor agrees to sell to the tenant buyer at a higher price than they agreed to buy it for. So when everyone is ready, the investor can assign the option to the tenant buyer for, say, £150,000, making £50,000 profit without having to own the property for even a minute. And for the whole time they've been sitting on that deal, they've made £300 per month without tying any money up. Rob, this is incredible. Why have we not done this?
Well, we'll come to that in a minute. But first of all, let's review why this is, in theory, a win-win-win. So we've now got 3 wins because we've got the tenant buyer in there as well. So first of all, as the investor, amazing. You get this rental income without tying up any money. And that seems like the holy grail because money is always the thing that slows people down. It tends not to be finding the deals. It's actually having the money to put in. This way you can get that rental profit without having any money tied up at all. In the meantime, you've got this tenant buyer in there who's likely to treat the property like they own it and not cause you any hassle because one day they intend to own it. And also, if the tenant buyer eventually decides not to go ahead with the purchase for any reason, the investor will generally keep all the top-ups they paid towards the deposit as well. I know that different people execute that differently. From the vendor's point of view, it kind of gets rid of a problem. So they know that at some point they'll be paid enough to clear their mortgage. In the meantime, there's enough money coming in to cover their costs. They know that at some point they're going to be paid enough for the property to clear their mortgage, and in the meantime their costs are being covered. The mortgage is either being paid directly by the investor or the investor's giving them enough money to pay it themselves. And they might even negotiate enough of an option consideration to pay their moving expenses. Realistically, a vendor would not do a lease option deal if they had a choice, because, well, a couple of reasons. For a start, they'd rather have the certainty of the sale and have it all done with. It's far better to have the money in the bank now and know that it's going through, because the investor could, of course, just decide not to actually take the option at all. And also, they know that property goes up in the long term, so by the time that the option is executed, the investor will be getting a great deal. So they'd rather not do it, but if they're in financial circumstances that won't allow for a normal sale, it can be an alternative that gets them out of a problem. Then the third party in all this is the tenant buyer, and they get the advantage that they get to move into a home that one day will be theirs without having to pay any deposit. They also lock in that price today, so even if prices rise, the amount that they have to pay for the property remains the same. That's the theory, and I think it's important to understand the motivations of everyone involved to really get to grips with why this is something that seems so appealing and you see it talked about all the time. Because, yeah, when you read it out like that, it does sound like a brilliant situation all round. But, as you hinted at, Rob, it's not necessarily that easy.
What, did it come across like that, Rob? Right, okay. So it sounds absolutely fantastic, doesn't it? You know, hardly any money in, sign a few people up, collect the cash every month, and then make a big whopping profit at the end. You can see why there's lots of expensive courses been made around this subject. But why are people creating courses? Let's have a look. Finding willing vendors is hard. Most people will be able to sell their home on the open market, so you're only looking for a niche type of vendor. You'll need to do direct marketing, leafleting, possibly some online advertisement, maybe advertising in newspapers, which is expensive and time-consuming. Next up, once you've found a vendor, it's hard to explain the concept. It's not something that most people are familiar with. So when people don't understand something, they're more likely to say no. Lack of understanding creates fear, and fear will result in people saying no. You need to set everything up on exactly the right legal basis. This is not something that you can write up on a napkin and hand over to them to sign. You need to set up this agreement using a solicitor who is familiar with lease options. And of course, a lot can go wrong. There's plenty of time for a vendor to decide they don't like the deal, take action against you, or they could die and leave you dealing with relatives who don't understand the deal, or the mortgage company could call in the loan. And finally, it's a big ethical responsibility. If the deal is set up correctly, then in theory, you can just walk away from it whenever you want. But it's not very ethical just to hand the vendor's problems back to them after they're profiting for a couple of years. Let's have a look at this. There's lots of expensive courses on how to do lease options. My theory is that because lease options are so difficult to implement, that the people who provide these courses can make more money off selling courses than they can putting lease options together. I may be wrong, but I think I might be onto something there, Rob.
You might be. It's something that's very appealing to talk about because it just sounds like such a great idea and it solves the investor's biggest problem, which is not having the money to invest to create that cash flow. So it sounds great, but I'd say that probably a real minority of people are successful at this. Let's just say some people are successful with this. Lots of people do very well with them. But those people are all working very hard at their marketing, and they're working very hard to make sure that everything is set up legally exactly as it should be. Lease options are not something that you can just dabble in. And I think a lot of people do. I think that they get excited about the idea of it and just kind of go out looking for these deals and very quickly kind of give up on the whole thing because either they're not able to find any deals, because it is really hard. It's not something where you can just walk into an estate agent and find a property that way. You have to really take it to the streets and find it out. Or they get beyond that and then they're faced with a vendor who just won't go for it because of all the parties in the deal, they're the ones who are coming out of it worst because they're basically in a position where they have to do something. Doing the lease option might be better than the alternative of getting repossessed or whatever the alternative is, but it's still not great and it's really hard to understand. So to actually get one of these deals through and get it all the way through to actually executing on the option with everything that can go wrong in the meantime, it's difficult. So people do make it work, but it's that those people are making it pretty much a full-time thing. And as you said, there are people who maybe are struggling with it and that's why they decide to make more money by telling people how to do it. Another thing that's probably worth mentioning is that there have been some dodgy people operating in this space. As we've said, it is a big ethical responsibility. That means that because there are lots of bad news stories coming out of it, it could be made a regulated activity soon by the FCA, which would mean you then need to have a license to do deals like that. The same thing happened a few years back with sale and rent back. There's kind of a similar idea, but you'd end up with the person selling the house actually staying on, living there and renting it off you. But then people getting really taken advantage of and being told that they could stay on indefinitely, but then kicked out. And so because of that, the FCA regulated that. We could see lease options going the same way, but at the moment, it's something that you can do. It's just something that you should probably only do with eyes wide open if you're willing to make a real commitment to it and you really understand what it's all about, and you're going to have to make it work. Because, yep, it sounds great, but if it takes you a year to actually get up and running with this, which it could easily take a year or more, well, you could have bought a few other properties in the normal route in that time.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think we'll hear less about lease options in the coming years. A lot of this strategy relies on people who are in trouble or in negative equity. The market's moving, so the market is getting a lot of people out of trouble by default, so there'll be less of a market to target. Lease options, I can see the headline appeal, get into property with little or no money, but actually when you look into the detail, there's a lot involved. It's not to say don't do it, but we are saying don't do it lightly. This is a job. Don't confuse yourself and think this is something that you could do 1 or 2 hours a week. This is a fully intensive strategy that if you're going to take on, you have to dedicate the time to. And for most people, they don't want another job. They want their properties to get them out of a job. Right. Okay. So, lease options. I hope you found that useful. Hope you've learnt a bit there. Resource of the week. Let's give you some more value. And this resource of the week comes from Guy Routledge. Now, Guy's given us a few resources over the past year or so thank you, Guy. And he's actually coming into the RMP offices today. So, look forward to seeing you, Guy, even though by the time you listen to this, you already would have been in. But anyway, so the app is locatable. And the particular part of this app that we really like, Rob, is the locatable search feature. You can find this in the show notes, but if you'd like to go to it, go to locatable.com/search. So, Rob, we've had a bit of a play around with it. How do you think our listeners could use this app?
What I like about it is that you can go in, you can put in a postcode that you want to be living near, and then you can say how far away from that place that you're willing to live and by what mode of transport. So say that you work in a certain postcode, you can put that postcode in, and then you can say, okay, I want to live half an hour away. And you can choose half an hour away or by walking, or you could choose half an hour away on the train, which obviously will give you a bigger search area. And then it comes up with a kind of a heat map for you that you can also put in the prices that you're willing to pay. And when you do that, it kind of shows you the area where there are properties within your price range and also within your geographical range. So that's clearly great for owner-occupiers, but then it could also be interesting for investors who want to attract tenants who work in a particular area. So we've talked about the commuter belt a fair bit and how the London commuter belt offers a much better value than further into town. So you could use it in that way to see what areas of the commuter belt are within a certain range of different parts of London. And you might find that there are pockets that look like they're a fair way out, but actually they've got a great train link and you can get into the middle of town in no time. That's the kind of thing that I can see people using it for. It's a really easy way to get a visual overview of how things are mapped out in terms of transport.
It is. So thank you, Guy. This is a really good app. It's really visual. It's really well put together when you have a look at and dig into this. And of course, we always like it when apps are free. Okay, so thank you for listening to this week's episode. Remember, if you haven't done the investors survey yet, get over to thepropertyhub.net/survey. Make your contribution, and we'll find a lot more about the investors who listen to the podcast, the Property Hub, and we'll be able to put all that data together and hopefully churn out a really interesting podcast around it and some other bits and pieces we've got planned too. If you can spare just a couple of minutes of your time, go to thepropertyhub.net/survey. We'd really appreciate it.
We would, and as you rightly said earlier, Rob, it is completely anonymous as well, so don't worry about giving us all your secrets. Next week, we're going to be talking about lessons learned from building a property community. So the Property Hub is 6 months old now. It's growing up fast. It's over 1,000 members now as well. And so we're going to be talking about some of the things that we've learned and that other people have learned from that community coming together. There's going to be lots of really interesting lessons in there.
There is. I'm really looking forward to that. So next week's episode, make sure you join us. Lots of insights given. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. But until next week, have a fantastic week, everyone. I'll let you get back to the World Cup now, but thank you for taking a property break in between it all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. Make sure you join our mailing list at thepropertypodcast.com.
And remember, we love 5-star reviews. Rob even loves them more than air miles.